You have read the signs as clearly as I. The growing power of chaos makes no distinction between the living and the dead. Nagash must rise, or our realms of silence will fall.
The Lich King ARKHAN the BLACK was the first of Nagash's followers, and he is also first among them in terms of loyalty and competence.
Lorehammer Library!
ARKHAN was born in Khemri during the reign of King Khatep. In his youth he was known as a rake that spent most of his time being an incel in the Temple of Azaph, mainly because his low nobility status left him no real opportunities for power. Nagash, seeking co-conspirators for his planned coup against King Khatep, promised ARKHAN, along with several other lesser nobles, power and wealth if they would support him. Using his influence as the Grand Hierophant, Nagash made ARKHAN into master of the levy of Khemri, making him responsible for the yearly census. ARKHAN also proved himself to be the most adept in the study and development of necromancy, and was the first to imbibe the elixir of life after Nagash himself. Nagash made ARKHAN his Grand Vizier after he crowned himself King of Khemri. When Bagar and Karsamar rode in revolt, ARKHAN was sent to punish them and put them down. He sacked Bagar and used the reanimated population to construct a large tower in the west of Nehekhara to watch over future rebellions. Also, he hoped to study the elixir of immortality that his master created and find a way to manufacture it himself. ARKHAN was said to have never been defeated in an open battle, and became one of Nagash's most favoured generals. It was said that ARKHAN died during the final siege of Khemri. One account tells that he held the armies of the 7 kings at bay to allow his master to escape, and that he was killed by a throwing spear after standing on a pyramid of corpses. ARKHAN stared in horror at the shaft protruding from his chest, knowing that it had pierced his heart. With his dying breath, he threatened that a terrible curse would befall any who touched his corpse, and with that he slumped to the ground. Within seconds, dark flames consumed ARKHAN's flesh, leaving behind only a blackened skeleton. The Nehekharans honoured him for his bravery in battle, with a cairn made of stones. He was the only one honoured in this way. Another account tells that the people of Nehekhara erected the cairn out of fear of disturbing his black remains. Yet another account claims that ARKHAN had planned treachery against his master, having been stripped of the right to bear weapons or having been defeated during the siege of Qatar. Conspiring with the kings of Lamia and Zandri to be granted their armies in exchange for the receipt of the elixir of life, he was betrayed and taken to Lamia. There he was drugged and forced to create the elixir of life for Lamashazar's court. It was Lamashazar's sister, Neferata, who took pity on him and offered him short respites from his drugged stupor in exchange for exclusive tutorship in necromancy. When she overthrew Lamashazar's cabal, ARKHAN was set free. Lamashazar, conspiring against his sister, lured ARKHAN into a trap in order to kill him, and then slay Neferata with sphinx poison. In desperation, ARKHAN mounted a ritual to save her, that would transform her into the first vampire. When it first appeared that his efforts were in vain, he instead decided to avenge his benefactor by killing Lamashazar and then levelling Lamia. He was slain by Abarash after having killed Lamashazar, and interred in a pauper's tomb in the great necropolis of Lamia. Nagash raised ARKHAN back to life after he had amassed enough strength in Nagashazar and had been contacted by the vampires that had survived Lamia's fall. As a representative of Nagash, the vampires were forced to obey his commands as if they were from Nagash himself. The united Nehekharans under the king ARKHAN first proved victorious, driving ARKHAN and his retinue back to Nagash after his defeat at the Gates of Dawn, when Nagash was furious and decided to poison the source of the river Vitae to bring them down. In the final days of Nehekhara, it was ARKHAN who defeated ARKHAN and brought him in chains before Nagash. When the Fellblade brought death to his master, after the machinations of the Skaven, ARKHAN fought for control over Nagash against the other surviving disciples of Nagash, before retreating back to Nehekhara. There he declared war on the living, falling on the civilization of Araby from his base in the Black Tower of ARKHAN on the edges of Nehekhara, sacking Bel Aliad and beginning what Arabian chroniclers would refer to as the Wars of Death. When Nagash was reborn again, ARKHAN accompanied him back to Nagash. The great necromancer sent him to reacquire the fealty of the vampires. ARKHAN travelled to the Silver Pinnacle, where he was rebuffed by Neferata. Eventually, after Nagash had been destroyed by Sigmar, ARKHAN returned to Nehekhara in 111 IC, carving out a realm on the edges of the domains of other Tomb Kings. The other Tomb Kings tolerated ARKHAN as a potential ally, save for Settra. The King of Kings demanded nothing less than total obedience from all who lived near the land of the dead, and clashed numerous times with ARKHAN. These feuds ended with ARKHAN feigning obedience and Settra retreating back to Khemri. ARKHAN's main goal had been the return of Nagash to his full and divine power. For this purpose, the Lich King was travelling the world to acquire artifacts of the great necromancer. He acquired the first artifact when he allied with the High Queen Khalida of Liberas to destroy the ancient vampire Mandragon. While the High Queen took her vengeance, ARKHAN looted the staff of Nagash from his crypt. In 2453 IC, ARKHAN led his armies against Altdorf and stole the Liber Mortis from the vaults of the High Temple of Sigmar. ARKHAN allied himself with Malabord, the bastard son of Leon Leoncoeur and the self-proclaimed Duke of Mousillon in Bretonnia, first arranging to have the Serpent receive the gift of vampirism. ARKHAN then lent his necromantic might to swell Malabord's forces before encouraging him to begin his long-awaited campaign against his father, the king. ARKHAN did this not because he vowed any loyalty to the Serpent, nor because he cared about the fate of Bretonnia, but because he had discovered that Alcanesh rested in La Massontal Abbey. He had provoked Malabord into starting the civil war, hoping that it would serve as a distraction while he raided the abbey's vaults. His plan might have been successful had the revelation of the Green Light as Giles Le Breton and his defeat and slaying of Malabord not ended the war. Having failed in Bretonnia, ARKHAN then travelled to Sylvania. Here he was confronted by Mannfred von Carstein, vampire count of that land. After an epic magical duel where no victor could be established, they entered into a very tenuous alliance with the goal of resurrecting Nagash. ARKHAN entered into the alliance because Mannfred had acquired a large number of relics and hostages that would be instrumental to the ritual, and Mannfred entered into it confident that the opportune moment he could betray ARKHAN and bind the newly restored Nagash to his own will would arise. After ARKHAN devised a ritual to help them escape Balthazar Gelt's Wall of Faith, Mannfred travelled to the Border Princes to recover the Fellblade, while ARKHAN marched back to Bretonnia to try once again to recover the staff at La Maisontal Abbey. To this end, he allied with the Lich Master Heinrich Kemmler and his monstrous bodyguard Krell. The two had been enemies of the Bretonnians for centuries, and La Maisontal had become an obsession of Kemmler's. Together they easily overwhelmed the defences of Duke Tancred, and both Kemmler and ARKHAN entered the vaults of the abbey. Here, however, Kemmler revealed that he had no intention of assisting in the resurrection of Nagash, favouring the uncertain future of a world of chaos over the static and sterile vision of the great necromancer's Pax Death Kana. ARKHAN and Kemmler engaged in a titanic magical battle, but ARKHAN was successful and claimed his prize, while Kemmler was destroyed. Returning to Sylvania, he and Mannfred, who had been equally successful, prepared to claim the final required artifact which was being kept at the nearby imperial fortress of Heldenham, home of the Knights of Sigmar's blood. Working together, the two undead lords breached the castle and recovered their prize. By Geheimnisnacht, everything was prepared, and ARKHAN and Mannfred rode with their hostages and artifacts to the stone circle known as the Nine Demons to enact the rite. Mannfred's plan to usurp the ritual at the key moment was disrupted by the timely intervention of a high elven army led by Eltharion the Grim, tasked to rescuing the Everchild, one of the hostages that they were using for the rite. Forced to confront this army, Mannfred was unable to sabotage the ritual as he intended, and while the elven army was defeated, and Mannfred himself destroyed the legendary lawmaster Belinar, with ARKHAN slaying Eltharion himself, Nagash was returned to the world free and unfettered from Mannfred's control. Once more, ARKHAN became Nagash's first and most trusted servant. Nagash created a new order of Dark Lords to enact his will, called the Mortarchs, led by ARKHAN, who was granted the title Mortarch of Sacraments. When Nagash began his campaign to conquer Nehekhara, 3 armies commanded by Krell and Dieter Helschnicht, Mannfred and Luther Harkon, and Queen Neferata, led the way, while ARKHAN travelled to Nagash-Azar to summon Nagash's elite guard entombed there. He joined the others at the gates of Khemri, where they faced the united forces of Nehekhara led by ARKHAN's old opponent, Settra. Settra's forces proved the stronger, with Nagash's armies being held back and ARKHAN being cut down in combat by Settra himself. Settra then took ARKHAN to the temple in Khemri to be utterly destroyed once and for all, when Nagash's plan was revealed. ARKHAN had smuggled Nagash past Settra's forces inside his own body. Now inside the temple complex itself, Nagash was able to enter the Nehekharan underworld, consume the death god Uzirian, and use the power gained to shatter Settra's forces, destroy the great king himself, and raze Khemri to the ground. Only the Black Pyramid was spared, which rose from the ground and returned with Nagash's victorious forces to Sylvania. In Sylvania, ARKHAN served Nagash as he drew in death magic and stored it in his pyramid. When a huge Nurgle demonic army invaded Sylvania and swiftly overcame the defensive forces of Mannfred and Harkon, ARKHAN, who has been reanimated, commanded the defense of the Black Pyramid. The battle was hard-pressed, and only eventually won by the forces of Undeath due to direct interference of Nagash himself. However, the whole invasion had simply been a distraction. A Skaven team led by Ikit Claw had tunneled into the pyramid, and just as the battle outside reached its conclusion, they detonated a huge explosive device that destroyed it and scattered a large amount of Nagash's careful hoarded power. This loss forced Nagash to finally work with the other Incarnates. The Incarnates had gathered their remaining forces in the woodland realm of Athaloran. When Nagash's army arrived, Mannfred was sent to parley with the assembled Council of Incarnates, who against their better judgment reluctantly welcomed Nagash. Their price, however, was a high one. They sacrificed Everchild, long assumed to have been the daughter of the Phoenix King and the Everqueen, and in fact the product of an illicit affair between the Everqueen and the elven hero Tyrion. In payment for their acceptance of him, Nagash offered them the architect of the Everchild's murder. Believing that his long-time rival ARKHAN was about to be humbled at last, Mannfred was dismayed when Nagash instead offered Mannfred himself as the scapegoat, sacrificing a servant whose loyalty was questionable, to say the least, in order to protect a faithful one, ARKHAN. Alongside Vlad von Carstein, ARKHAN continued to serve as Nagash's right hand throughout the Incarnates' planning, and when they and their assorted armies teleported to Middenheim, the stronghold of the ever-chosen Archaon, he led the forces of undeath alongside his master. Ultimately, ARKHAN was left behind by Nagash as the distraction, as he and the other Incarnates went to try and stop Archaon's world-ending plan. After their failure, ARKHAN stayed behind to sacrifice himself to allow Neferata, who he still cared for after all this time, to escape Middenheim to face the ending of the world on her own terms back in Sylvania.